Hello and welcome to a different kind of video. When I first started my YouTube channel about 2 years ago now, it was definitely more art focused and had more like studio vlog type videos. And while I've somewhat moved away from those kinds of videos and make more of my cinematic storytelling type videos, I wanted to share with you a newly completed sketchbook. I did one of these, I think probably almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I'd say. And it's been my mission to try to fill more sketchbooks. I am a full-time artist, and the irony of making something like this your job is that you do tend to lose the time for art making. So this year in particular, I made it my goal to try to fill up more sketchbooks, and little did I know that in May I would start my 100-day project, which I have mentioned before, but back in the middle of May I decided to start a 100-day project where I paint or draw something every single day for 100 days. And I'm about halfway through right now, actually, which is quite exciting, and it's really been helping filling up my sketchbooks. So it's very exciting to be able to share this with you, and I hope that you will enjoy. It's always quite nerve-wracking and vulnerable to share a sketchbook because this tends to be a space where I'm experimenting and exploring, and there may be artwork that I do not like at all. But in the spirit of transparency and showing that anyone makes any kind of art, let's just dive right in and get started with this sketchbook tour. So this sketchbook is an Arteza watercolor sketchbook. I just happened to decorate the front before I started. I added some scrap fabric squares and added a little bit of paint marker and then stamped the word sketchbook on the front. And I really like how this cover turned out. Alright, so here is our first spread. This is back in January of this year that I started. This was when I purchased my first jelly gouache set, but I swatched all the colors here and then decided to start out with a little mixed media piece. So I've really wanted to explore with different mediums this year and how they work together and how to create textures and patterns and anything like that. So this was my first real exploration of some art media that I recently purchased and then some that I had already owned. But so this is a mix of jelly gouache, Neocolor crayons, colored pencil, and I believe some paint markers. In this sketchbook is also where I learned the importance of fixing my artwork, especially in sketchbooks, and especially when working with mixed media. There are a bunch of pages that have kind of gotten ruined because I didn't fix them, and the colors have transferred to the other side or smudged and stuff like that. So I've definitely learned my lesson and will invest in a good fixative for future sketchbooks. This is the second spread. I really love this one. I love the colors and the flow. I created this for one of my January YouTube videos where I talked about embracing fear as an artist and just letting go of expectation and pressure and just going back to basics and playing with art mediums. So I really enjoyed creating this piece and love how it turned out. Early on in January, or it might have been early February, my best friend Morgan and I decided that we wanted to start doing a weekly art date where we got together and met up at a coffee shop or at one of our houses or in a park or something like that and just spend a couple hours creating art together. And it's been really enjoyable, and we've been pretty consistent with it for the whole year so far. So this was our first art date that we ever went to. We went to a coffee shop and it was just really enjoyable. It was a learning curve on figuring out what mediums to bring, as I brought way too many this time, and I brought materials that were a bit hard to use in a cafe setting. So definitely learned a little bit after this first time and simplified my supplies as we continued on these art dates. And a lot of the entries in the sketchbook are from those art dates, actually. So from here on out until probably my 100-day project, they will mostly be from those weekly art dates. But this is a mix of oil pastel, Neocolor crayons, and paint markers. Here was that same art day where I decided, after I'd finished that piece, I decided to sketch a bunch of different teapots. So I looked up reference photos on Pinterest and just sketched all the different shapes and designs of various teapots or coffee pots with a colored pencil. I quite like this spread. This one was our next art date at another coffee shop. This was done with my Copic markers and colored pencil and maybe a little bit of paint marker, I think. Yeah, with the white here with paint marker. I really love the difference of color, but also how it works really well together, both spreads. I really love the grid pattern here, and I love the green and the pink mixed together. I was really pleased with how this spread turned out. So these were done on 2 different days, actually. This is a study of Treebeard. He is a character from Lord of the Rings, and this was when Morgan and I went to the cabin in February, and we had just watched Two Towers. And so since Treebeard is debuted in that movie, I thought he would be perfect to do a little bit of a reference sketch of him. I really love how he turned out. This was a big experiment on textures and getting a variety of different greens as he's covered in different kinds of moss and foliage and lichen. I really love how the textures turned out, and I love the lines on his face. And then this spread on the other side I did on the following art date that we had. This is done with gouache. I was in the mood to paint butterflies. Butterflies have always been a weak point for me. It is very difficult to draw a mirrored image, and not that each butterfly wing is exactly the same, but the shapes are basically the same. So this was trying to experiment with different butterflies. I was using one of my butterfly reference books, and I don't really like them, but it was a good learning experience. It's something I always want to draw, but I always end up unhappy afterward. I'll get there. This was another coffee shop art date day. This one is just really fun. It's a little bit busy, but I love the idea, and I love the trees and the green and the shadows here, and I actually really like my little fox character too. I love the composition of a full page over here and then like 2/3 of the page on the other and having white space. I think that looks really cool. This was done with a variety of different media. We've got Copic markers, paint pens, colored pencil, Neocolor crayons, Inktense pencils. This one was really fun. I just love the movement in this piece and the way that I was able to capture shadow. It's not perfect, but I actually really love it. This was the same day. While we were at the coffee shop, I decided to draw a couple of things that were in front of me. This was my new little flower crochet bag, and this was I don't remember what kind of plant it was. It might have been a fig tree that was in the window, and this was a leaf actually from that plant that had fallen. So these were just done with, this was done with marker and a little bit of colored pencil, and this one was done with colored pencil and a little bit of marker actually. And then I just added some fun stripy colors in the background. I went on a solo art date by myself. I went to Barnes & Noble and got a cup of coffee and sat in one of the reading areas and came up with an idea. I had just recently read the book The House Without Windows by Barbara Newhall Follett. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I was really inspired by that book and wanted to create a painting of the main character, Eppersip, and in the first third of the book, she travels to a new place each third of the book. The first third is the meadow, and then she goes to the sea, and then she goes to the mountains. And the first third was my absolute favorite of the entire book, and she makes friends with a herd of deer, and there's a particular doe that she connects with, and she also makes a friend, a little chipmunk, and she names it Chippy. And she's basically a meadow fairy, and I knew I had to paint her. There was a particular scene that I read where she's running away and needing to escape, and a doe comes to help her, and she jumps on the doe's back, and they race away back to the meadow with Chippy on her shoulder, and I knew that was what I needed to paint. So this was my first initial idea and trying to play with colors. I liked the composition and the pose of the sketch, but I didn't really like my color choices or anything like that. So I actually took this to my iPad and made a cleaner version of the sketch, which was this, and I traced that into here because I originally wanted to paint it traditionally, and then I got a little bit nervous and decided to paint it digitally, and that ended up being my April postcard for my Patreon. I will pop a picture here so you can see the finished piece. I really love how it turned out. Here we got our next art date. We went to a park this time, so we were sitting out on a bench in a giant field, and I decided to paint or draw my dress, what I was wearing. I really don't like how that turned out. My dress is a really small, like, checkered pattern, and it was really difficult to figure out how to draw that. This was just with some markers. And then we happened to see a bluebird, which I have hardly ever seen a bluebird here in my area of the Pacific Northwest, but they are a really beautiful bird, so vibrant blue with a little bit of a red belly, and it was so fun to be able to see that. So I drew a little bluebird. This was with colored pencil and Neocolor crayons, and then I brought a couple flower reference books, so I sketched a flower from one of those. This is a little spread that I did at home. I was wanting to just play in my sketchbook and experiment, and this was done with gouache and oil pastel and Neocolor crayons. So with the pastel and crayons, it got really messy, and as you can see, I tried to put a piece of paper there to try to protect it a little bit. I had bought a fixative, and it doesn't really work very well, so I needed to buy a different brand. But I did try to spray this one a little bit, but obviously it does not work very well. These were some fun sketches that I was making for my patrons. I do a bi-weekly sketchbook session where I share a process video of me sketching, or real-time sketching, or a time lapse, or something of that sort. And I wanted to experiment with color, with different mediums, but like the same image. So this one was done with oil pastel, and I really, really, really love how the colors turned out on this one. And I did the branches with colored pencil. And then this was an experiment with the chalk pencils, I believe. The chalk pencils and maybe some Inktense pencils. Inktense pencils are water soluble. That was an experiment with this. It got a lot muddier, definitely not as vibrant, but it was still fun to experiment. And obviously that's what a sketchbook is for. This was another solo art date. This was a really fun day. I went to a coffee shop by myself and just spent a couple hours sketching a bunch of different animals. I just wanted to continue practicing a variety of different animals in a variety of different styles, and this was just so much fun to do, and I love so many of these. I love this badger, I really love the chipmunk, I love this fox, and then here was the rest of the animals that I had sketched. This was just really fun, and it's not something I forget to just sketch with graphite pencil, but this was just a really enjoyable day. I need to do that again. On this art date, Morgan and I went to visit the cherry blossoms down by the waterfront here in Portland, and afterward we went to a coffee shop / restaurant, and we had some lunch and coffee, and we painted the cherry blossom trees. This was done with oil pastel. Very messy. I don't really like how it turned out, but it was a fun memory. I ended up drawing this at the cafe as well that day. I really loved this sketch so much. I really loved the two chickadees that I drew. They turned out really well. And then on a later, I can't remember if it was the same day or a later day, I wanted to try a little bit of a more monochromatic illustration of a landscape and do like all purples with colored pencil. And I ended up giving up and I didn't like it, but did not fix it, so it transferred all onto this sketch, which was quite a bummer. I might be able to rework this one day and create a little painting from it. Really loved these little birdies. This was just another quick little experimentation with Neocolor crayons. This was an experiment with another new art supply that I had recently purchased and never used before. This is Pan Pastel. It's a soft chalk-like material, and I wanted to experiment with using it for a background. It really does make a really nice, soft, very blended background. I don't have the right little blending tools that you can buy, but it was fun to experiment nonetheless. This was kind of like an initial idea for this painting that I ended up doing for a video. I did the pan pastel for the background, and then I added the swans with gouache and added some colored pencil detail, and then these flowers are done with gouache and oil pastel and colored pencil and Neocolor crayons. So this next spread was the first day of my 100-day project, so back in the middle of May. Morgan and I had gone to another park and sat under this giant oak tree in the sunshine, and it was the most beautiful day, and I decided to just paint a myriad of nature things. I tried my hand at a butterfly again, and I actually really like how that one turned out. It's a lot more loose, and I think that's why I like it more. And I tried to draw a couple other bugs that I've never drawn before, a ladybug and a beetle, and a bunch of different flowers. I really loved this spread a lot, and it was a great way to kick off this 100-day project. So from here on out, these will be my 100-day project illustrations. So this was day 2. I did a little shrew. These were my sketch ideas. So it's a little shrew with a dandelion hat. I painted the background with gouache and the flowers in gouache, and I colored him in with colored pencils and colored the flower with colored pencils as well. This was day 3. Day 3 and 4. I had just made lilac perfume and lilac lemonade, so I was very inspired by lilacs, and I wanted to try my hand at drawing them. This was strictly done with colored pencil, and I really love how it turned out. The vibrancy of the colors and just like the saturation of it is really beautiful. So for day 3, I just did this single lilac, and then the next day I finished it by adding another one and painting the background, and then writing a little piece from a Mary Oliver poem. And this spread is one of my favorites that I've done so far in this project. I did this while watching a movie called The Big Year, which I'd never seen before. It's really wonderful. It's very funny. It's got Steve Martin and Jack Black, and it's all about bird watching, and it was really enjoyable to watch, and I really love how this ended up turning out. I had made a big ol' mess of a color background. Love all the different colors and how they melded together, and I decided to draw some ducks. I've never painted ducks before, so this was a fun little experiment. Filled in the background with a myriad of different colored pencils and added some flowers with colored pencil and Neocolor crayon, and I just turned out great. Really loved this one. And this, I turned this one into my June postcard for Patreon. So this was the next day. I did try to do a similar style with a colored background and then going over top with a bunch of different colored pencils, like patchwork almost, but trying to blend them in. I didn't really like how this one turned out, as I was experimenting with cool colors. I don't really paint with cool colors all that often, so it was an experiment, and I shared a reel of this painting and so many people loved it, which is so often the case that my least favorite ones are the ones that other people love. The next day, Jake and I went to the coast for our anniversary, so we were there for 2 days, and the first day I painted this on the beach. I had actually painted the background with gouache at home, and then on the beach I had drawn a bunch of seashells and just wanted to play with different textures and patterns. This was the next day at the beach. There is this one house that I can always see from the beach that we go to, and it just seems like a dream beach cottage. We always go in springtime, and it's always surrounded by this huge field of Scotch broom, and it's got giant pines behind it, and I just would love to visit that one day. I decided to paint a little version of that scene, and I actually really love how that one turned out. This was done with watercolors and colored pencil and Neocolor crayons. My next day, I wanted to draw Merry and Pippin from Lord of the Rings. My Patreon does a monthly art prompt that we tried to do together, and this month was afternoon tea, and I instantly thought of hobbits and, of course, Merry and Pippin. So I ended up drawing this little scene, and I really, 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 really love how it turned out. Thankfully, I scanned this before any of this transference happened, but it's a little bit of a bummer that some of this colored pencil has gotten onto this page. But this one was done with gouache, colored pencil, and Neocolor crayons, and I will definitely be making a print of this one. The next 2 days I wanted to experiment with birds. Birds are another animal that I have a hard time with. So this one was a song sparrow. We have quite a few of those in our yard, and I absolutely love the song that they make. Kind of that similar style of a mixed colored background, and then the colored pencil and Neocolors on top in kind of this sketchy patchwork way. This one, I like the colors, but I don't really like how my bird turned out or the layout of the foliage, but I really love how this one turned out. This one was the next day. I did a yellow warbler, again with the same mix of materials, and I really, really love how this one turned out, and I think I'll probably make this into a print as well. My husband is a really big fan of Zelda and had just recently gotten the second Breath of the Wild game, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's called, so I was inspired to draw Princess Zelda. This again was done with gouache, colored pencil, and Neocolor crayons, and this was really fun to do, and I actually really love how it turned out as well. I love the background and the distant Hyrule Castle in the back, and love the mix of greens and blues and the pop of pink in the front. A lot of transference on this spread, which is unfortunate, but I recently had signed up to Katie Moody's Patreon page. She's an artist I follow on Instagram, and she does these live patron drawing sessions, and this one was one that I had missed, but I watched the playback recording of it and ended up drawing the flowers that they did from the reference photos that she provided. And this was an experiment with markers in Neocolor crayons. So the base layers were my Copic markers, and then the top layers were my Neocolor crayons, and I really loved the texture and the smoothness that it creates. In particular, the dandelion and the creeping thistle are my favorites of the four. So this was my next day. This was a art date with Morgan. This was at her house. we had just gone downtown and popped into a couple shops, and I picked up some Tombow water-based markers. The artist Katie Moody uses them a lot, so I wanted to experiment with those. So I had bought some from an art store that we popped into and then experimented with them once we got back to her house. And so the bottom layers were the markers, and again I topped it with the Neocolor crayons, and I really loved how those two blend together. It really creates a beautiful texture. I can't really quite describe it, and it probably doesn't come across on screen, but really love how those turned out. This was the next day. I wanted to make a little bit of like a patchwork quilt type design, and this was done with gouache and Neocolor crayons. This was the next day. I was inspired by our recent coast trip and all of the barn swallows that you see flying about. They are so cute, and I wanted to paint them flying across a coastal scene. So this was done with a mix of gouache, colored pencils, and Neocolor crayons. You can see that I've formed a favorite trio. I really like how this turned out. I love the colors. I liked the color block sky and just leaving it as straight paint and then adding texture to the water and the grasses. I had filmed the process video for this on my Patreon, and this one was really enjoyable to paint as well. Next, I had recently been watching a old childhood TV show that I used to love as a young girl. It was H2O, Just Add Water. It's about mermaids. It's an Australian show, and I was inspired to recreate one of the characters, Cleo. She makes a diary of their secret life, and I wanted to recreate it. And I really love how this spread turned out. I painted the back with this really beautiful gouache paint and added the tail and Mako Island and the moon phases and scales and this mermaid. A lot of this what you would see in the page of her diary, but I kind of reorganized it a bit and added my own little flair to it. But this one was so much fun to make. This was our next art date. We went to another cafe, Cafe Umbria, and I wanted to just paint things that were in front of me or that I saw, so I drew my little strawberry tote bag that I had brought. I drew my Tombow markers, and I drew my beautiful vanilla latte that they had made me, and they had a monstera plant in the window, so I drew a couple of leaves from that. Next was a little spread experimenting with the Tombow markers again and Neocolor crayons. These are different flowers that I had planted and are growing in my little backyard area that we have next to our little tiny home. So we've got some marigolds and violets, maidenhair fern, some woodland strawberries, nasturtium. I didn't end up writing the name of this one, so I don't remember what flower that was, but it was just a little summer garden spread. Oh, and that's it. That's the last entry of this sketchbook. So it feels so good to finally finish another sketchbook after so long, and I'm already almost through another one, which is quite exciting. This daily challenge is proving to be quite the help in filling up sketchbooks this year, so I'm sure I'll have another sketchbook tour soon. I really hope that you enjoyed this sketchbook tour, that you found some inspiration from some of the spreads that I shared, and know that if you struggle with making art or you want to get better, sketchbooks are the way to go. And even if it's like a 10-minute drawing session every day, the more you draw and the more you paint, the better you will get, and that's just fact. So this has really been helpful and a really fun process of exploring different mixed medias, and I've already learned so much and have already found favorite ways of using certain medias, and I've already introduced that into new work. Before I go, I wanted to share some exciting news that if you have not seen already, I have launched an art course on my Patreon page. It's my very first art course that I've ever created. I made it all entirely by myself, and I'm really proud of it. If mixed media is something that interests you and you've been following my work for a while now, this course might just be for you. I walk through my entire illustration process from the beginning of idea creation to working through all the steps to the final painting, and then I share how I scan and photograph my artwork as well. I'm going to end this video with my little intro and promo to the course. If you're interested, please take a look, and I hope that might be something that you might want to join me in. My Patreon and website are all linked below, and I wish you all a magical week ahead. Hello, and welcome to my very first art course. My name is Randi, and I am an artist and illustrator based in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. My muse and fascination comes from the magic of the natural world, and my passion is bringing it to life on paper through my illustrations. I want my work to invoke feelings of nostalgia, bringing one back to that feeling in childhood that absolutely anything is possible. I love bringing to life whimsical worlds that I like to believe the animals and fairies secretly live in right outside my window. Though I started out as a watercolor artist, I have recently fallen in love with gouache and mixed media. The color and textures I can create with these mediums I feel fits perfectly with the magical worlds that I create, that I hope invokes that feeling of being able to jump right in to the painting and join in on whatever fun activity the woodland animals might be participating in. So many of you have asked to see tutorials or process videos from me, and though I have shared generalized videos and peeks into my process on my various social platforms such as my YouTube channel or Instagram page, I really wanted to create an in-depth course where I take you through every step of the illustration process, from the initial idea to the final painting. In this course, I will walk you through a variety of different mediums and show you how I like to use them. I'll take you through how I come up with the initial idea for an illustration, and then how I gather reference images and inspiration to use throughout the painting process. We will then walk through the initial sketching process and how I like to create a refined and finished sketch digitally that I will then trace onto our final paper. Next, we will work through base layers and work our way up through secondary layers, details, and then final touches to our finished piece. Lastly, I will take you through how I scan my artwork, touch it up digitally, and get it ready to be able to share on social media. I hope that from this course you will be able to begin your own journey creating your own magical worlds in your own style, feel equipped to explore the creative world of mixed media, and feel inspired on how to use a variety of different artistic mediums.